Okay, cool. Hey, how's it going? Steve Walter here, and today what we're going to be talking about is portrait retouching. Same thing we always talk about, or at least I always talk about. You just listen. You don't actually talk. You can type though. Yeah, so I'm doing this again in collaboration with ProjectShutter, and I wanted to work on one of the portraits that we took from our last meet. This was a couple months ago at this point, but we got our man Carlos right here. I took a quick shot of him. I actually took a couple pictures of a whole bunch of people that day. And our walks that we do are really a way for us to get out, take pictures, experiment, explore, network, meet, connect, all of that stuff. So all as much positive stuff that you could think of in the photo world. So this shot was taken in Chatfield Hollow Park in Killingworth, Connecticut. And like I said, this was Carlos. I had a strobe set up to the camera left. This new lithium-ion battery-powered strobe that I've been using, a Cheetah 600 XL, I think it's called. You can get it from Cheetah Stand. Not that it really matters. You can use anything. You could use a speed light. You could use any other type of strobe you can use. Probably could have gotten the same shot with a bounced reflector, but I'm just letting you know what I use. So what I'm going to do right now is go through the process of retouching this. So we're going to dive right into this. So right now I'm starting in Lightroom, and typically what I like to do with my images in Lightroom is I prep them. And I say prep because basically what I do is I kind of pull out some of the contrast, I pull out some of the sharpening, things that, that typically get processed when you do a raw processing. But what I like to do is start with a flatter base for when I do my retouching. So that way, for example, with the contrast, I don't have a whole lot of, and you can even see without the sharpening, it's a little bit soft in here. But now I know I'm working with the most basic detail. And then what I'll do after the fact is I'll sharpen it after. But what I don't want to do is start retouching with artificial artifacts or too much contrast. And really sharpening, all that is just a super, super localized contrast. One of the other things I'm going to do in here is I'm going to zoom back out and I'm going to enable the lens correction. Here I was using the 51.2, the Canon. You get a little distortion and vignette in the edges. The vignetting I don't mind sometimes, but chromatic aberration I definitely want to try to get rid of. So we can see in his hair here, if I turn it off and then turn it on, I'm going to go over to the manual and just move these up a little bit and make sure we can pull out some of that. Good. This highlight over here, it doesn't really bother me too much, but I'm going to try and pull it back just a little bit, and I might open up the shadow detail just a little bit more. Cool, so that's basically what I'm going to do. The other thing I want to do is just a quick white balance here, because it's looking a little magenta. That's a little better, and then even into the shadows. The shadows actually look okay there. So here's a before and after. So you can see it's much flatter, and you can automatically see just, hopefully on your screen, the detail that's showing up now in his beard. Before, there's some detail there, but I want to be able to see all of it when I go into Photoshop to start cleaning all of it up. Not that I'm going to do much with his beard, but basically that's what I'm doing, is revealing all of that detail that's there. Good, so this is good. So I'm going to right click or control click, whatever you're using, and choose Open as Smart Object in Photoshop. So basically Smart Object is going to allow me to preserve all of my raw information. I should have opened Photoshop first, but I didn't. It's fine, it doesn't take long. It's going to preserve all that information sort of in this locked-in embedded file. That's basically what Smart Object is this sort of all your camera raw stuff inside of this file. So basically what that means, I'm going to say basically a few more times, if I double click on this, basically, it allows me to could not complete your request because source and destination are the same. Oh, interesting. I've literally never seen that before. I'm going to try that again. There we go. So now what it's done is it's opened up that file in Adobe Camera Raw, which is basically the develop module in Lightroom. So all those settings that I already made are all right here. So now at any point in time I can adjust my raw file and still retain that raw detail. So if I wanted to open up the shadows a little bit more, I'm not doing it to any processed file. I still have the raw file. So I'm going to cancel this because I don't actually want to do anything. I already have it all set the way I want. Typically the first step that I do if I'm going to do anything is I'll start with a liquify. So I do Command-Shift-X to pull up liquefy, and really what I'm going to do, you might be thinking, liquefy, man, he's real thin, why would I want to do anything to him? No, I'm going to clean up little bits of fabric. Things that are distracting, I'll clean that up. I could make it look like he's super ripped and super cut. I mean, maybe we'll do that, right? Kind of give him a little more definition over here. Sorry, Carlos. You're in great shape, dude, but, you know, for the people, I want to make you look super ripped, right? We could give him these giant neck muscles, right? Give him something like that. No, I'm just kidding, I'm not gonna do that. But maybe what I do wanna do is clean up this little bit of fabric here. Again, this is super tiny stuff. Do I need to do it? Nah, probably not, but I'm gonna do it anyway. But cleaning up this line over here, just so it's not as distracting. Not that this is really taken away from the image, but you get my point, I think. Cool, so it looks pretty good. And sometimes I'll do it to kind of clean up hair, but his hair looks good, his beard looks nice. Maybe I'll trim in, I'll pull in this just a little bit. I don't want to use liquefy to completely reshape somebody, but I will use it to enhance, slightly enhance. All right, cool. So it looks good. I'm gonna hit return. Now I'm gonna make a new layer, call it clean. And the clean layer is where I grab my healing brush, and this is where I go through and clean up little bits that I don't want there, really. Also make sure, yep, current and below. I'm actually going to choose all layers right here. No, you know, I'll go back to current and below because I don't want to grab anything from above if I had adjustment layers above. But here's where I go through and clean up kind of bigger details. Again, just things that I find distracting. I'm not gonna try to make him look like someone he's not. Now up here, I'm gonna try and get rid of some of this speckled light. So I'm gonna use this tool to at least go on a first pass with that. This should do a pretty decent job. So what's cool about this tool is you actually, versus the spot healing, I prefer the healing because if you hold options to this little target, that allows me to sample an area of where I want Photoshop to look for skin, or in this case, it doesn't know it's skin, it just sees it as texture. I'm telling it where I want it to grab texture, and then when I paint, it uses that sampled area. So I don't want to necessarily sample from his hair to paint over his skin, because those are two completely different textures. So this allows me to have more control. Good, that actually did a pretty decent job. We'll clean that up a little bit later. So yeah, I'm just cleaning up skin right now. Little details. Good, good, good. Maybe a little bits in the hair here, where the highlights are a little hot. A little hot. That's what people say when they talk about highlights. They say they're hot. You should say they're fire. Those highlights are fire. People used to say stuff was hot, now they say it's fire, don't they? Don't they? All right, I digress. Clean up this, he's got this one little gray hair. Again, Carlos, love you. Not criticizing, just using you right now though. Dope, let's come over here. Grab that, little hair, stray hair. I could go through the time of cleaning up his beads, or his necklace, his chain. I think it's beads. Not gonna do that. I'm gonna leave them. Just gonna leave them. And that's fine. Cool. So that was just the clean layer. Again, cleaning up little details using the healing brush, not the spot healing brush. The difference between the healing brush and the spot healing brush is the spot healing brush, Photoshop figures out what detail it should grab. So if I just start painting, it analyzes the surrounding area and kind of fills in the gaps. And it usually does a pretty good job, but sometimes it doesn't. So the healing brush just gives you more control. Next, from here, I have a little action that I have set up, and I have it linked to a function key. And basically what this does is it takes everything that I just did, flattens it on its own layer, then takes that layer and turns it into a high pass layer, and then links that layer to an empty layer that I've labeled color. So you can see that here, layer 1, this is basically my texture. You can see I have a high pass filter applied to it with a it's turned into a smart object, so I can apply a filter to it and I can always modify it. So for example, right now, if I know I want to increase the detail, I can bring this up to like a 5, and you can sort of see what it's doing is it's just grabbing texture. So you can see I can just see edges really. Everything in the middle that's gray isn't going to appear there because I have the layer set to overlay. That's basically what overlay does, is it knocks out middle gray and preserves anything above 50% gray or below 50% gray. And that is then being applied to this color layer. So there's nothing on the color layer until I grab my brush tool, right? I'm going to set my flow to 6%. Flow to 6%. So you hold shift and do your number. Holding shift and hitting a number adjusts your flow. If you just leave it as is and hit a number, it adjusts the opacity. So I want 100% opacity with 6% flow. And I want a really big soft brush, so I'm going to hold shift and do left bracket. That's as soft as it can get. And now what you'll see me doing is toggling between making the brush small and little. And what I'm doing is sampling color from surrounding areas, kind of like I was doing with the healing brush, but now I'm just painting over color. So for example, you can see right here there's a transition of where there's a light part in his forehead to a dark part in his forehead. So what I want to do is I want to smooth out that transition. So it'll be a combination of sampling for where there's a lighter area and painting into the dark area, and sampling from a darker area and painting into light area to sort of blend that out so it just looks smoother. So there's less abrupt transitions. You can also see right over here where there's this little hot spot, fire spot. See what I did? Yeah. Fire spot on his cheek right here, so we want to clean that up. So I'm going to sample from over here and just kind of paint over. So you'll see as I'm going along, it's really, really subtle. Again, I'm using a 6% flow, so it's not a drastic amount, because right now if I had everything set to 100 and I were to sample and paint, you can see what that does, and that doesn't look good at all. But notice all of that texture, all of his original skin texture is right there. If I were to grab any weird color like a green, again, just to show you the effect, and if I were to paint, there's all his skin texture, because that's coming from this layer, this texture layer. As I turn it on and off, you see it's just applying wherever I paint on this layer. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So I'm going to select all, delete, because I don't want those colors there. I'm going to go back to 6%, and we're going to start smoothing out some stuff here. And I do this repeatedly, and what I'm doing is I'm using a Wacom, I think it's technically Wacom. I've heard one of their marketing guys refer to it as Wacom, like whack-a-mole. It's a Wacom tablet. This is an older version. It's the Intuos Pro. It's a weird word to say, Intuos. I think it was the Intuos Pro 4, something like that. It's like 2 or 3 years old, but it still works. I barely use half of its capabilities. I just use it because I'm better at drawing than I am at clicking with a mouse. So here I want to show you real fast already what a difference this has made. When you're looking at it now, you might be like, well, it doesn't really look like you did much. Maybe you've rewound this and you've watched it again. Or maybe you're just better at seeing things. But here is no color, here's color. So you can see what I've done is I've just smoothed things out. And it's sort of a way of, you can kind of think of it as like a dodge and burn technique where I'm lightening and darkening areas, but it's really more specifically with color. It's kind of like an approach to a frequency separation, right? So the frequencies are color and texture, and I've separated them, but basically what I'm doing is I've really only separated the texture, and I didn't really separate the color, but I'm now adding on top of the existing color that was naturally there. I'm just doing it in a very, very subtle way. So you can see here I'm cleaning up that little fire spot on the cheek. Bigger the brush, the softer the edge is going to be, so if you want a smoother transition, use a bigger brush, but the trouble with that is that sometimes it's going to spill into areas where you don't want it to spill. And this is the technique I always use for cleaning up any dark spots under the eye, because the texture underneath and around the eye is so specific that you can't mess with that. And if you start messing with the eye texture, especially that super, super soft fleshy part on the underneath, fleshy part, it's all flesh, but I want to say it's fleshy because it's so soft. Yeah, you can't mess with that. So you got to preserve that. Cool. So far so good. And even here, if it's a little too dark because of that shadow, you can just clean that right up. Nothing is real. Nothing is real. And again, when I think of retouching, I don't think of completely changing everything about someone. You can see he's got freckles on him. He's got birthmarks. I'm leaving all that because that's Carlos, you know? I don't want to change who Carlos is. But what I want to do is just make sure he's looking fresh, you know? If you look at this and you were to see him in person, you'd be like, yeah, it's the same guy. I don't want to change it so much so that it doesn't look like him. So here is, we'll zoom out slightly, before, after. So you can see what that's done. He doesn't look like he's 15, but it just looks like he's not as spotted with his skin texture. Cool. So that's basically what I'm gonna do there. What I'm noticing now that I'm looking at it is he's got a little bit of red in him, and even in the lips too. There's a little bit of red in here, so I want to clean that up. I'm gonna go above here, so I'm done with these two layers right here. I could group them together. Let me just call that. Actually, I'm just gonna leave that, and we'll go down selective color adjustment layer, and I'm gonna go into my reds. I'm just gonna pull out some of that magenta. And maybe 5, 7. Do a quick before and after. Yep, much better already. Yeah, that's much better. So now just on his face, it's also pulling out it from the reds around here, but I almost don't mind that. This is just this is a more natural skin tone. Good, cool. Now the next thing I'm gonna do is a little bit of dodging and burning. So I also have that set up to an action. Really quickly, groups everything together, puts it in a little D&B layer. There's two ways that I approach dodging and burning. One is with adjustment layers, curve adjustment layers. And you can see the burn, you can see I've just kind of taken that center point and pulled it about halfway down. The dodge, center point, pulled it halfway up here. And then I sometimes will use a soft light blend mode that's at a medium gray, and I'll use the actual dodge and burn tool. So I'm going to approach it the way I normally do with just my adjustment layers, my curves. So I grab a brush tool, still 6%, super, super soft. Right now my mask is set to black, so that means it's hiding this. So if I were to show what this curve layer is actually doing, I'm going to hold shift and click on that. So you can see how bright it's actually making things. That's way too bright. So if I continue to hold shift and click on it, that says hide that adjustment layer. But what I want to do is subtly paint in the effects, that brightness. So I'm going to grab a brush, fill it with white, super, super soft. And wherever I paint, that now is painting in super small amounts of that white and what that adjustment layer is. So here, now what I like to do is accent the areas that already have a natural highlight. So when I approach dodging and burning, I'm thinking about two things. One, do I want to accent a natural highlight to make it stand out more, like on his lips here, right? I want to give some definition to the lips. Or do I want to make something brighter to call more attention to it because it's too dark, like, for example, in his eyes. So there isn't really a natural highlight there, but I do want them to stand out a bit more. There's a natural catch light, which I will enhance that a little bit, but his eyes, I'm just going to do a quick pass over the whole thing. I do want his eyes to pop a little more. So as you can see, and pop's another term that everyone just loves using. But it does, it makes them pop. So now you can see his eyes are standing out a little bit more. I'll hit little dabs on his cheeks here, and just a little splash on his cheek. Right, it makes me think of Bob Ross with his happy little clouds. It's got Carlos's happy little cheeks. Pull out a little detail in the beard here, right? Happy little beard. All right, and then I'll go ahead and accent up here So this is another way. Here's a good trick if you want to make someone look like they got, you know, bigger guns than they got. Again, Carlos, your guns are fine, dude. Nothing wrong with your Carlos guns. Nothing wrong with your Carlos. Nothing wrong with your guns, Carlos. You can use dodge and burn. And what I'm going to do, there's a nice trick that I use to switch back and forth between these layers. Option left bracket, and that says select the layer below. So that way I can quickly just go down to my my burn layer. And now I can start painting with black. Again, I'm still painting with white, but I'm painting in what that curve adjustment layer has done, which is darkened everything. So now I can go through and, again, try to find natural areas that I want to make darker, or areas that I want to conceal, right? I don't want to add as much prominence to by burning them. And I might have made his eyes a little too much, so I'll switch back and pull out some of that. That's one thing you got to watch out for, is doing too much on the eyes. Pet peeve of mine. So we'll go back to burning, switch back to painting with white. Just add a little bit of contouring in here, right? And that's looking pretty good. I think we're done. So let's do an overall before and after with just dodge and burn. No dodging and burning, dodging and burning. So you can see what that does, is that starts to shape everything up. So you can see there's way more attention put on his face, and maybe a little too much on his chest. So we're gonna go back to our dodge here. We'll switch it back to black. We'll just tone some of that back. All right, I just don't need as much pectorals. All right, put on the burn. Just kind of burn that a little bit. Because really I want people looking at his face, not his chest. Again, Carlos, no offense, man. You got a dope chest, dude. I gotta do those inward pecs. You gotta get the inside. Get a sideburn over here a little bit more, right? Clean that up. Cool, get little spots of hair in here, burn it in, and we're good. Cool. So, dodge and burn, that's better. And overall, the whole image, we're gonna go back, and if I hold Option and click on the original layer, there was no retouching, and here is my retouch. So again, he doesn't look like a totally different dude. We went through, no, you guys didn't do anything, you just watched, I did it. I went through, added this clean layer first, right? Clean up some little bits. You can see what it did up here in the top. Then we added in the color, and you can see how it was a little blotchy up here, right? And maybe over here and over here on the cheek. But then this color layer with the texture, that smooths all that out. I noticed there's a little bit of red, so we clean that up, right? Brings it back into an orange realm. And then a little dodge and burn. Make his eyes pop, make his face pop nicely. So then what I'm gonna do is just save this file. Now, when I originally have it set, I have it set to open in Photoshop as a TIFF. Don't mind me as I just scratch my eye. I originally have it set to open in Photoshop as a TIFF from Lightroom, 16-bit. Now what I'm doing is just saving it. So it's saving that TIFF, it's a layered TIFF. And then when it's done saving it in Photoshop, it's automatically going to import and link that directly back into Lightroom. So we're gonna pop back over to Lightroom, we're gonna add finishing touches to it. So I can just Command Tab over, pop back into Lightroom, here's my image, and again, nope, that's another shot of Carlos. We weren't using that one, this is it. So here's the raw file that I still have intact, but now it's made a second copy of it. Here's a TIFF file. And now I can do final things like a little bit of cropping maybe. I tend not to crop beforehand because I never know exactly how I'm going to approach my crop, so I want to make sure I have the room to do anything I want with it. So I'll leave it alone. Maybe I'll see what it looks like cropped up to his arm there. I think that's a little bit better. That's a stronger shot. And we'll have him kind of looking away, right about there. What I'm using as a guide here is this tree. So I don't want to see that blue sky, because that blue sky, and I look at the thumbnail too a lot to kind of compare, because when I'm looking here, I can't always tell. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of move this over, and I think that's a pretty good point, and then I look up here and I'll see what it looks like as a smaller image, sort of a zoomed out view, and I like that crop better. You know, I'm using the rule of thirds here with his eyes. I'll line them right up on there. And his face is just about in the rule of thirds here. He's more in the golden rule where it's a little bit more towards the middle, but that's okay. Good. So here's our crop. And then next what I want to do is put a little bit more attention to his face. So you guessed it, I'm going to add a little radial vignette. It's going backwards. I'm going to invert that mask so now you can see it's put the darkness on the outside, right? My exposure's down a half a stop. And I'm going to tighten up the oval a little bit. And cool little trick, if you tap O, you can actually see where your mask is being applied. So watch this as I drag this feather. You can see whatever is green is where the darkness is being applied, that half a stop, and then whatever isn't is where it's going away. So you can see how much I'm blurring it or feathering it, fading it into his face there. If I press O again, you can see that. Here's gives me a before and after of just that, right? Just my radial adjustment tools. So that looks good right there. Now I'm going to come down, I'm going to add a little bit of clarity. I always like adding a little bit of clarity, especially to my male portraits, because the skin texture in a guy's face can handle the clarity, the punch that adds. Sometimes I'll go back in and add, open up the shadow area if I want it to kind of have a more painterly and illustrative look. In this one I might do that. I'm going to bring my whites up slightly. My highlight area is pretty good where it is. I might bring that up a bit. I'm going to bring these shadows down. I could even bring my exposure down just a bit. And clarity will sit at 20. That's nice. Tone curve, we can pull up the shadows just a little bit. Again, going for that more painterly, filmic kind of look. And we'll keep our contrast in here. That's too much in the shadow. This is a nice trick too. If you find that you're moving around your pinpoint too fast, if you hold Option, you can move it around in more subtle ways. If you move your hand in really big movements, it just only moves that pin in small increments. There we go. So now you can see lots of texture in his beard here. Maybe we don't want that much, so we'll pull back the shadows just a bit. Before, after. Yeah, so far I'm still digging that. And split toning. Let's see what happens if we add a little bit of color in the shadows. So this was a warm, sunny day, so I might want to complement that by putting a little bit of warmth in the shadows, right? This will kind of fit for the woods feel. Normally what I would tend to do is go into like the blues or the cyans for my shadow area, but here I want to accent the mood of the portrait, so I'm going to add a little bit of warmth in the shadows, and by dragging the balance all over the right, it's only going in the darkest areas. So I can see what that looks like before and after. I'll even pull back just a little bit right there. Now I'm going to add my sharpening back in. If you double tap in this area, it zooms out, and you can double tap, tap once, apologize, to zoom back in. And now here I can start to drag in and see what my sharpening is being applied there. So around 60 is pretty good. If I hold Option and drag the masking, you can see whatever's white gets sharpening, whatever's black doesn't. And I really just want to sharpen him. I don't want to sharpen the bokeh, this blurry background over here. Don't really need to worry too much about noise reduction, but I'm going to bring it up just a little bit. I'll bring up my color noise. I tend to always slide the color noise all the way up just to get rid of all of that little bits that show up over here. Close that detail. Lens corrections, we already did that. Transform, don't need to do that. Effects, if I wanted to add a little bit of grain, you know, I know Carlos is a film guy, so he might appreciate a little bit of subtle grain. I know it doesn't make sense to use a noise reduction and then add grain back in, but really the noise reduction is pulling out the color. You can actually see, should have done the noise reduction before, but it's all right. Yeah, you can see a little bit here in the hair. Again, you might not be able to see it with the compression, but there's little bits of color in here that the chromatic aberration didn't pull out. So it's seeing it as noise, and as I turn my detail back on, this little color slider is amazing, and it just pulls it all out. So now that's all uniform in one color. So we'll zoom back out here and set it back to full, and that's pretty much it. So if we can go back to a before from Photoshop, and that's just by hitting the bracket key, the left bracket, or the backslash key. There's our before. This is what we did in Photoshop. And then before we went to Photoshop, we had this. So here we are without any crop. You can see, it still looks like Carlos, or this still looks like the shot that we have here, but it's just enhanced a little bit. Some corrections to color and some corrections to some toning. Cool. So I hope watching that is helpful. If you have any questions, rewatch it again, see if maybe, you know, I said something, because I spoke a little fast. If I said something that you missed, or just post in comments, right? That's why comments are there, is not just to say, hey, that's awesome, right? But also to say, yeah, I have questions. How did you do this? Or why did you do this? Or you were mumbling a lot because you just had a cup of coffee, so I'm not quite sure I understood you fully. So repeat yourself or answer me in a comment so I could do that. Cool. Again, I'm Steve Walter. I'm a New Haven photographer, and I'm working with the group ProjectShutter. Carlos is one of the guys. There's a bunch of other dudes there, and great people. And really what we're trying to do is encourage, support, and let the New Haven community of photographers thrive. So that's what we're doing. So definitely check us out on Instagram at ProjectShutterCT. Also check us out on Facebook, ProjectShutterCT, and the Facebook group. Find us there, have conversations there, and come along on our meets. Definitely follow the Instagram page to see when the new meets come up. And yeah, I'll catch you on the next one. See you.